My name is Milion Belay. I'm the General Coordinator of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. We're having a 3-day meeting which has started on the 21st of February. The main purpose of this meeting is, we've come back from COP. Previously, we participate in COPs, but we don't come back and kind of organize a debrief session. At this debrief session, we have invited government, we have invited negotiators, we have invited the civil society, some funders and our partners, and also some people from the universities. So the main purpose is to ask the question, what was the outcome of COP27? What has been achieved? What was lost as Africa, as a continent? And on the third day of the meeting, we'll use the outcome of the first 2 days, then for members of AFSA to come together to strategize for engaging for the coming with the coming COP28 and also for the future COPs.
The outcomes on COP27 for us as civil society, it was in the way of ongoing discussion, because what we expected directly as a civil society, we did not reach directly outcome. Why I say that? Because civil society are engaging on the ground with local community and indigenous people. And when we talk about climatic change and whatever, we see that the money has not come directly on the ground to engage directly with local people, indigenous people, preserving forests, preserving the land. So the discussion between state about how they can engage to mobilize funding between state and the Paris Agreement, outcome did not come on the ground. So this thing failed for us as civil society. And as we need is to do how we can strategize to look how to work directly with civil society by waiting when they can adopt the funding mechanism, the loss and the damage, the JEF process, and the civil society did not access to the JEF funding. So we need to mobilize as donors who could engage directly with civil society on the ground by waiting all agreement, all engagement between state and bilateral donors.
The next steps for agriculture leading to COP28 is very, very important, because one, for the first time now, we were able to get a clear direction on the implementation of climate action on agriculture and food security. And we set out 8 objectives, which in another way you can say mandates. And so what countries are supposed to be doing, and particularly as Africa, will be making submission on the how to achieve those objectives. And that means that we want an institutional framework established within the climate change framework, so that it can ensure that whatever actions and activities that are taken to address climate change, they do not threaten food production and food security. Secondly, we also agreed on having a kind of a portal, online portal. We want to make sure that the online portal that is established is one that can be used and useful to the smallholder farmers, who are the majority in Africa. And that's why we want to hear more from the civil society organizations who are working with farmers as to what can work best, so that when we make our submission as Africa, we take into account those considerations. And then finally is the aspect of new topics as part of sharing knowledge. We want to hear from farmers and organizations that are working with farmers as to what those new areas are. And from what I've heard, not only here but also when we were in Sharm el-Sheikh, the aspect of agroecology as a practice seems to be becoming important in Africa. And I think it will be useful to hear from the experts as to what are those critical elements of agroecology that are appropriate for Africa given its climate risk and vulnerability.
So far, we have not seen much from the COP decision, because right now we know there's the Gender Action Plan, which we are really pushing for the implementation, but still there are issues like finance. Finance has really been an issue in everything that we've been talking about. We thank God that loss and damage won the day's decisions, but in gender, that was an issue. Then we also had a position on issues to do with finance. Of course, I talked about it, but I say it is a major issue in all COP discussions. Without the finance, nothing can happen. Even as much as we talk about the 13 principles of agroecology, then we're not able to implement or have actions if we rely on the finance that is always discussed at the COP. So at least for us as AFSA members and members working with AFSA, we can be able to only get our own funds to advance agroecology. But then now what we want from finance is that we don't want civil society organizations and smallholder farmers to get loans. Already there's a problem with the loan issue. Some actually have even gotten loans. We work with communities. Women especially get loans to develop their land and to do agriculture agroecologically, but then at the end of the day they're not able to pay for the loans. So why should we give it in terms of a loan, yet it is supporting nature? It is actually working with nature, not against nature. So we should just make them grants. That is our demand.
Small-scale farmers, after the COP27, they were dismayed, much as what they expected was not fully achieved. Though there were some benchmarks where we can maybe start talking about what we anticipated. One, when it comes to what is happening now across the continent and more so in Africa, the smallholder farmers are highly affected in terms of economic losses because of the drought. And sometimes when it's raining, they are also highly affected because of floodings and the unpredictable weather variabilities and climate changes. So these implications are that mostly it is negative, that if what we want to be discussed, which can harmonize the issues of like provision of adequate funding to the sector to cure the climate variabilities, to have resilient maybe seed, resilient varieties developed by the farmers through agroecological practices. If the discussion are centered on the other, looking at the industrial approaches, which are also bringing other effects in relation to our health, in relation to the health of the livestock, in relation to the health of soil, in relation to the to polluting the space. You find that these effects come back to the smallholder farmers who are majority and who have been producing. Likewise, when it comes to food production, you find that we are the people who have been producing food to ensure food security and nutrition. So if issues discussed there don't address the real ways of how we can produce sustainably, then that means that the discussions were not in our favor. So I believe that this COP27 did more harm to the smallholder farmers than what we anticipated.
But most important is now the issue of looking at the majority affected group, which we have identified as the small-scale farmers. All sectors have been affected by climate change, but when you look at the effect on agriculture, which employs the most vulnerable, which employs the biggest populations, especially in Africa, which employs mostly women, because based on the assessments, many men have run away from the gardens. Many men have been disappointed by the performance of agriculture, so they have left women in the gardens. So if we are to work on the most affected, most vulnerable, then small-scale farmers must be helped. So the loss due to climate change is too much on that group. That is why we are looking out for building their resilience. When there is any climate change effect, these people's losses, the damage caused to their livelihood is too much compared to others. That's why we are over-concentrating on the asks. When we go to the COP, we would like all the groups, whether you're on technology, whether you're on mitigation, adaptation, gender, try to look at building resilience of these small-scale people. Because once we are not resilient, then we are bound to lose a lot of money and also a lot of people, because their sustenance is on nature-related activities, especially agriculture.
The agroecology movement in Egypt is going on since a long time, because we have been talking about food sovereignty and food security, self-sufficient, food self-sufficiency. And it's a challenge not only for Egyptians but for the Arab world, including of course the old North African countries. What I can see from the role that AFSA is doing and the cooperation that we are doing with AFSA as RAED and as civil society from North Africa, this will serve more the needs of our farmers, of our target groups, of our vulnerable communities, those who really need to understand how it is important for their livelihoods, for their development, for their next generations, how agroecology is important for them and for their countries. So it's very important and it's very much needed, and it's in our list of priorities as RAED, as our NGO, and also as in our cooperation with AFSA.
For me, the next step should be working on accountability and implementation. So often we get very good policies agreed among stakeholders, but the implementation lags behind. So we are pushing for different stakeholders, specific society organizations like AFSA, to really work on ensuring that there are internal accountability within states and countries to implement what is agreed. Secondly, we need a robust access to finance. We need to see both philanthropies and even bilaterals like the World Bank and other stakeholders to increase budget allocated to agriculture, earmarked to strengthen and support initiatives focusing on agroecology.